Let's say I go on a podcast and someone asks me, what did you learn from Jordan Harbinger?
Good luck
What
with
would you
that
want
one.
me to say?
You know,
What lesson would you
what
give
would
to
I
me?
want you to say? Is that fair? Is that a fair question? What would I want you to
What
say? Is that really? I
what
don't know if that's a fair question.
what lesson would you want to share with me that I can reproduce in that instance?
Oh man.
The Tom Screen podcast is owned and made possible by Ethical Marketing Service. If your business is struggling with Google or Facebook ads, maybe you're frustrated figuring it out or there's a performance issue, Ethical Marketing Service has worked on hundreds of accounts and we can help in this area. We offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, and for every direct account we look after, we sponsor a child in a developing nation with food, water and education. If you would like to find out if we can help, it's a free, no salesy consultation call, and the link is in the description. Enjoy the episode.
Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the episode today, we have Jordan Harbinger. Jordan, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man.
It is very much my pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I run the creatively titled Jordan Harbinger Show. It's a podcast that I've been running in one form or another for going on 15 plus years now. So one of the original podcasts, and I just fell in love with it right away. You know, I really enjoyed talking with people. I enjoyed the conversations. I enjoyed the prepared outline stuff that I'd created. I enjoyed the audience interaction. It was really something that was essentially built for me almost, at every level. I did a brief stint in radio after starting podcasting. So I thought, oh, this is the next evolution, right? And then I just stayed with podcasting because I thought, radio, you don't own it. It's live. There's callers. They don't really deeply interact. The guests have to be, I remember my station manager saying things like, get the guest in and out in 10 to 15 minutes. And I thought, I'm not even warmed up by then, with this person. We're scratching the surface of pleasantries at that point and maybe getting into some stuff. I need another hour with this person to really get the good stuff. And so podcasting just sort of always stuck with me for that reason. And I think now people finally get it, right? Like it's now a thing where people realize, hey, this is kind of the point. It is supposed to be long format. You are supposed to involve the host in the reads. You are supposed to make the show a little bit about yourself and not just straight up journalism. It's just such a delightful mix of things that are great for creators.
Well, thank you for the introduction. And you touched on pretty much the theme that I'm going to go for in this episode.
Nice.
And it's a little game, not probably very original, but a little game called What You Learned From.
Mm-hmm.
And so looking back over your podcast, you've interviewed some pretty amazing people. And so the first question is, Jordan, what did you learn from Shaq?
So Shaq, this is going to be an interesting quiz because I've had like 1,500 interviews. So it's like, this game should be called Do You Remember? But yeah, what I learned from Shaq, actually, he's a really interesting guy. I gotta say this diplomatically, you wouldn't necessarily expect that. If you don't care about basketball, you might think, what am I going to learn from this guy? But I asked him, hey man, you've got a career that has had longevity outside the NBA. How do you make decisions? And one of the things that he told me that stuck with me for a really long time was he has a panel of people that he trusts that help him make decisions. Now, that's not necessarily terribly original for a business, but for a person, it's actually a really good idea because he'll have his old, I want to say his old basketball coach from high school who just isn't going to make any money from him, just cares about him as a person, probably mentored him when he was young. And that guy will say, I think you should do this because of this, or I don't think you should do this because of that, or I have no opinion on this. But then he's got his lawyer, he's got his accountant, but you don't want to just ask your lawyer whether you should do something because the answer is always no, right? Because it could incur you can incur liability. You don't want to ask your financial planner, your manager, your accountant, whatever, if you should do something because the answer is always yes, because they're like, well, we're going to make money doing it. And then he has, I want to say his mom is on the panel, his uncle's on the panel. So there's people on there that will say, yes, this is lucrative. Yes, you might be able to do it without incurring liability, but you're going to hate it. It's stupid. It's not your style. You're going to be bored. You're going to think it's dumb. Other people are going to think you're dumb for doing it, whatever it is. And so he can take all of those inputs and weigh them and decide whether he's going to do something. And you still see him doing some things where you think, what are you doing, man? But the answer is probably making a ton of money, right? That, like when you see him doing those insurance ads and you think that can't be that fun and it's not that great for your brand. The answer is probably, yeah, but they paid me $50 million. Who knows? So I just thought that was a really interesting way to make decisions, because if I'm looking, and I look at this in my own life, let's say I get a sponsor for the Jordan Harbinger Show, and it's something that I don't necessarily love as a product, but they're offering me a lot of money, I'll bounce it off my wife, I'll bounce it off my producer, I'll bounce it off the person who sold the campaign, I'll bounce it off people at my network, Podcast One, and they'll each have different inputs. They might say, this is a pretty lucrative campaign, you should do it. Somebody else might say, you're going to feel like an idiot for doing it. So I'm able to weigh those inputs, and I thought, this is a really good idea to have. Shaq calls it the panel, and I do the same. You bounce it off the panel, and it stops you from making decisions based on one factor or based on one argument. And you really do get to weigh a diverse bucket of inputs in your life. And I don't think you should just do that for business. I think you should do that for your personal life too. Do I want to work more and make more money? Well, that sounds great. Well, maybe I should ask my wife. No, I want to go to on family trips. I want to be able to go out to dinner at night. I want you to be done by 5:30 p.m. so you can play with the kids. You know, that's an important factor that I might not weigh when I'm going, oh, I could probably make a couple $100,000 extra every year if I just had no free time. You know, those decisions have to be made in concert with those who matter the most in your life. And whether that's your spouse and your kids or other people that you trust. And the other function of that is people can't get away with anything, right? So if you have a manager and they're crooked or corrupt or they're pocketing your cash, well, if they're in meetings with your lawyer and your accountant all the time, it's going to be really hard for them to get away with that, right? Where's the money from this insurance campaign? Oh, I don't know. You know, everyone's in your business, for better or for worse, but that means that it's harder to get away with stuff. It's harder to get away with convincing me I got to do something when everybody else thinks it's a bad idea, because you're doing it in a forum where other people are involved. So it's hard for one person to have your ear and steer you the wrong way, even if that person is yourself.
It's a great answer. And yeah, not something I would have thought of. And it's cool to hear that you've implemented it in your own life as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to your point initially, I thought, how would I feel if someone did this with me? And I haven't done anywhere near as many episodes as you have. And I think I'd struggle in some instances and not in others, because obviously certain episodes or conversations, they have more of an impact on you than others do. Mm-hmm. But this one's a personal favorite of mine, and I think you'll probably be fine with this one. It's Jocko. What did you learn from Jocko?
Jocko's concepts are really similar, or sorry, really simple, I should say, but they're not always easy. And he's got a book called Extreme Ownership. He's got a couple books, but I think the first one was called Extreme Ownership. And what that was essentially looking for what is, I guess, your fault in anything that goes wrong, or something that's under your control in anything that goes wrong. And so it's actually a really empowering concept, because if you look at something that happens to you, like this person stole from me and then they kicked me out of the company and it's so unfair and wah. If you look for the part that you contributed to that, even if it's minor, like you trusted them and you shouldn't have. Okay, well, the answer can't be don't trust anyone. How do I repair the criteria that I use to trust people? Okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this. Well, how did they get away with that? Well, they did this thing where I relied on them for this, and I decided not to put it in writing because it was going to be uncomfortable to have a conversation with a lawyer. Well, I'm not going to make that mistake again. You know, so you find these little things where even if you've really been dealt a bad hand, you can find places where you could have controlled it. Even if that answer is, I never should have hired this person because a bunch of people told me that they were bad and I just didn't listen, you know, or I shouldn't have been so trusting. As long as you don't make yourself the victim in that situation and you find areas where you could control things, you actually end up really empowered, and you end up, I should say, in a position where you can at least try not to repeat that same mistake. You know, so even if you have, let's say you have bad metabolism and you've gained weight, but you have a medical reason because you injured your knee. Well, okay, but I still gained weight. Why? Well, the way that I shop didn't change after I injured my knee. So even though I couldn't move as much and do all the sports I love, was still buying Cheetos and Coke and drinking it for lunch and having a bag of Cheetos and Fritos every night, which sounds delicious, by the way. So I didn't change my eating habits. Okay, so it's like maybe 80% not your fault because you got injured and you had a metabolic disease, but also you didn't change your habits. Okay, so I can change my habits. Doesn't mean you're going to lose all the weight and be back to where you were, but it means that you are now taking control of the situation, because you can't wish your metabolism better and you can't wish your knee injury to go away. But you can change your environment, change the way you shop, change the way you look at food or think about food, whatever. So whenever you start to think that something is happening to you that's totally outside your control, all you have to do is sort of go up the timeline or upstream and find the places where you could control things in the future or could have done something differently, not to beat yourself up like, oh, I shouldn't have ever done X, but just to find the places where you can modify behavior or thinking patterns or whatever it is in the future. And that turns out to be really empowering, because then whenever something happens to you, all you have to do is pay attention and analyze what went wrong, do a post-mortem on the situation, and you can maybe come up with some really useful stuff to not have that happen to you again. Because wishing that bad things would never happen to you in life is futile. Complaining and beating yourself up about bad things that happen to you in life is also not a good... It's not good for you, and it's pointless. But figuring out why or how bad things have happened to you and then figuring out how to avoid those or change the outcome or whatever in the future is a very, very useful exercise.
Would you say that impacted you personally? Because I kind of feel like you're probably quite a, let's say, capable person at that point anyway. So would you say that it had an impact on you personally or not?
The interview with Jocko where we talked about this? Yeah, I would say so, because I think it's really human to go, oh, well, this unfair thing happened to me and it's really woe is me and this all sucks and there's nothing that can be done, so I'm just going to whine about it and then allow it to mean that bad things happen to good people and wah, wah, wah. And I think that's very human. I don't think it's even a bad thing that people do that. It's just totally a normal thing. I don't think it's the most helpful thing. I think better is to go, okay, that happened to me. This is not good, but it's something I can survive. Other people have survived far worse. I'm going to come out the other side much stronger, but not just like, I'm going to come out the other side much stronger. Yay, pat myself on the back. But okay, I'm going to come out the other side much stronger. Here's why. Okay, where did I go wrong? Even if you got to travel really far upstream because you really didn't do anything to deserve what happened to you, and you have to find some place. It's like, oh, okay, maybe where I went wrong was not having the self-confidence to start the business on my own. Therefore, I looked for a partner. Therefore, when I found a partner who maybe I thought was kind of a shyster, I still accepted them and their behavior because I didn't have the confidence to start the business on my own. And that's not something you need to beat yourself up for, but it's a really good insight to have for yourself if you are that person. If that's indeed true, because otherwise you could easily repeat that mistake, right? Your business partner screws you over. Okay, well, business partner screw you over. But if you still have that same confidence issue where you think, but I can't just rebuild this on my own, I need a partner, you're going to make that same mistake again. And I've been in those shoes where I've had business partners do bad things and try to sue me when I left and all this stuff. And I thought, oh no. And then I jumped right back into another partnership with somebody else. And my wife was like, what are you doing? Just do this on your own. And I'm like, I can't. It's too hard. There's too much work. And she's like, this guy's also a piece of crap. What are you doing? You're just repeating the same mistake. And I thought, that's a really, really good point. So I just ditched that person and started over. And it was the best thing ever. But it was tough because I had to come to the realization that, like, oh, I'm relying on other people to sort of outsource the confidence in building this business when I really can do it on my own. And that was a really good realization. But I wouldn't have come to that without, one, the panel of other people telling me, and two, being able to take extreme ownership by going really far up the chain and thinking about, okay, why did I do this? Why am I thinking like this? What part did I play in this really unfair thing that happened to me? Because even my lawyers and the judge were like, wow, this guy really got screwed over. It's really a crappy situation. And I thought, okay, yes, good. They all agree. But I could have stopped there and been like, everyone thinks that I got screwed over, so I'm right. Yes, it's true, but also, what's my real takeaway from this? The real takeaway isn't these people are bad and I'm a victim. The real takeaway is you can always control something next time. And what you find to control is you just have to really examine your situation and go really, really far upstream. Because sometimes it has nothing to do with those other people or whatever the situation is. Sometimes it's a mindset that you adopted when you were a kid that got you into this situation of getting into, let's say, relationships with bad people. You know, if you find yourself dating terrible guys, you know, or women, whatever. But, you know, a lot of women will say, I date terrible guys. I have terrible taste in guys. Okay. Well, is it the guy's fault that you're picking them? Yes, it's their fault that they're abusing you or mistreating you. That's definitely their fault. But what is it that you are doing or have done, or a mindset that you have? And you probably need to work this out with a therapist if you're in this situation where you're attracting those people into your life and then tolerating their behavior in the beginning to the point where it escalates into something really bad. And you know, it's controversial to say that because people go, you're victim blaming. It's like, well, no, I'm not blaming you. I'm just asking you to maybe understand where you can control things in the future and avoid these same problems. But people don't want to do that because extreme ownership is extremely uncomfortable.
I've actually heard the only thing that we can control is our response. So there's events.
It's kind of the same. It's kind of the same thing, but also really what you're looking at is not just your response. You're looking at what you have done to contribute to any situation, even if it's not that specific situation itself, but like your particular position that put you in a vulnerable spot in the first place.
Well, you touched on something which I was considering asking you about, and it was you did a post on the website, which is looking back on the worst chapter of my life 4 years on. And I think that probably isn't 4 years on at this point. But,
no, it's been a while.
In summary, is that all concluded?
That is all concluded. Yeah, that's been concluded for a while. That was concluded before I wrote that post because I don't think you can really read the label from inside the jar. So I needed 2 years to get through the legal nonsense with that. And then I probably needed another year or so to get clarity around it. And instead of just being angry or annoyed or whatever, or like flailing around. And then people kept asking me about it. And then I wrote that post. Yeah, probably 2 years ago now.
So it's old news is what you're saying, Jordan.
Yeah, it's old news. I mean, the truth is that was the post really discusses where, I was able to take extreme ownership of that situation, look at and reflect on it, find out how it made me better and stronger. And it's interesting because whenever I go through tough situations now, I'm often just thinking, one, at least it's not that situation again, because that was terrible. And two, I realize all these different factors that went into that and all the stress that I had that I didn't need to have because of the way that it turned out. And now I can sort of take that whenever anything is bad and I go, well, I remember catastrophizing back then about this much worse situation and nothing ever came to pass. Why would this be even worse when it's not? Why am I convincing myself that it's worse when it's not? So there was a lot of that kind of thing. And so I hate to be Mr. Cliche here, but a lot of times when you go through something really horrible, it really does make you stronger in a way. Like when the worst thing that you can think of in your business happens to your business and you make it through the other side and it's the best thing that ever happened to you in retrospect, it really is hard to then start crying in your cereal about some other perceived setback that might actually be something really amazing.
Great answer. This one is actually featured on the channel. So my guess is it was a big interview for you. It's Kobe Bryant. Yeah,
Kobe Bryant. I'm not a big basketball guy, despite Shaq and Kobe being on the site here, but and Dwayne Wade. But Kobe was really interesting, especially because, we had talked a few months before he passed, and it was just this really candid conversation that was sort of done almost on the fly. They invited me to fly down there, but his people were like, oh, crap, this is today. He's got a Sports Illustrated thing or a ESPN thing in 15 minutes. And I was like, I need 45. And they're like, fine, because you flew down here and got a hotel and a camera crew. Okay. So it was really, really nice to do that. He wasn't prepped by media trainers. His publicist was sitting right there off camera, but what are you going to do? And it was just a really candid conversation. And since I don't care about basketball at all, I asked about parenting and prioritizing and all of these things that were important to me that I knew were going to be important to him in that moment. Because if you looked at his Instagram when he was still around, all it was like photographs of his daughter playing soccer or whatever they were doing. It wasn't highlight reels from his career in the NBA. It was just personal stuff. He had completely switched from self-promotion, NBA, basketball, whatever it is. He had completely switched from that to, I'm just a parent now and I'm creating books for kids. And he didn't lean on any of his past accomplishments. It was almost like he just started over. It was really an incredible kind of thing, because I think if you are the best at if you're world famous in some area, it would be really hard to go, I'm just going to start over in this other area because I like it. Most of us, myself included, would just be like, hell no, I'm riding this wave until I'm dead, because this is where I get my fame and my validation and all of my money. Why am I going to start something new? It's like I got the Jordan Harbinger Show. It's a popular podcast. It makes a good living for me and my family. I'm not going to be like, I want to be a professional trail runner or whatever. I'm not gonna start hang gliding and be like, this is my new thing. I got to be a professional at this. I got to be the best. I got to make my name in this area. Why would I ever do that? But he was a true champion. I am obviously, I'm a podcaster, but not far from the same level as Kobe would have been at anything. And so I just could never do that. And I think most people are like that. You get really good at something, it becomes part of your identity, and then you lean on it. He got really good at something, it became part of his identity, and then he went, okay, I'm done. Next. It was just like, who does that? Only people like Kobe Bryant. So that was the interesting look inside the mind of that guy. I don't care about championships or team member stuff, none of that. I just don't care about basketball or sports most of the time. I just thought it was a really insightful look inside this guy's head, because he was just not afraid to start over. And it's not like he went from basketball to golf, that he'd been doing for 20 years or 10 years. He went from basketball to writing children's books. What the heck? I mean, what the heck? This is not even, I'm trying to think of one thing that writing a children's book about a girl who plays tennis and lives in a magical kingdom has anything to do with basketball. And I'm drawing a blank. I mean, he really picked one of these things that was as furthest away from his core competency as he could get. There was no physical skill involved. It was all writing. It was all production. It was all creativity. I mean, it's really like, in so many ways, the opposite of professional athletics. And he went all in.
Well, believe it or not, I've got a fairly long list of people I want to ask you about, but I don't think we're going to get to it. So
no, I might be.
Do you want to do do you want to do a quick fire on them?
Sure.
It's challenging. So the next one was Mark Cuban.
Yeah. Okay. Quick fire. Let's remember quick fire. Mark Cuban was interesting because he's super accessible. That was the one thing I remember about him, is you can literally just email him and he'll reply if he's interested, and he won't if he's not. And he is very, as you've seen on Shark Tank, he'll speak his mind, but he's got a great business mind. And it's fun to see him get things wrong, not because of schadenfreude or anything like that, but it's fun to see somebody who's really smart, really switched on, get something totally wrong, and then be like, fine, that's just how this game goes. Next. And he's really good at that. And I think that's one reason for his tremendous success, is he's not afraid to pivot. He's not afraid to say, this is wrong, I'm on to the next thing. And he's very well versed in a ton of different areas. So, polyglots tend to do well when they're trying to dabble in a lot of areas.
Next one is Russell Brand.
Russell Brand, really interesting guy. So that interview almost didn't happen. They kept trying to cancel it. And I was like, I flew down here and I'm outside the door. And they're like, what door? And I'm like, the door you told me to go to. And they're like, oh, crap. So we did it in the green room of like Ellen DeGeneres or something while he was eating a sandwich. I mean, it was just like the most, oh crap, we got to do this interview, last minute type thing. Really smart dude, in many, many ways, a deep thinker. Kind of surprised me because he doesn't come across as a genius in a lot of his movies, and certainly not in his comedy sets, but he is actually quite smart. And he's also very charming, which is, he's very well known for that. I thought he was a very friendly guy, deep thinker, and he's been through a lot, and he's reflected on that a lot. He's a recovering, I want to say, heroin addict or at least alcoholic, and that's been a core part of his identity, and now he's, sort of seeking his spiritual stuff through his podcast. I don't always agree with everything he says, but you can't really argue that he doesn't think deeply about a lot of things, even if I disagree with his conclusions.
Well, last one I'll go with, I got to choose from my list. I'm going to go with Matthew McConaughey.
Oh, yeah. So he was, of course, also very charming, very interesting guy. A guy who really knows himself well, I think, and that's unusual. I think a lot of celebrities actually don't know themselves well. I think a lot of celebrities avoid trying to get to know themselves because their persona is what makes them the money, and maybe they develop the persona to get away from themselves. Matthew McConaughey is either really, really good at that to the point where everybody's bought it hook, line, and sinker into who his persona is, or that's really who he is, and he knows himself really well, and he leans into that. So authenticity tends to shine through with that guy. And the way he tells stories is really captivating, and frankly, is just a fun conversation. He treats you like, a lot of times when you talk to somebody who's well-known or famous, they treat you like you are their audience and they are performing. And with him, it was really just a conversation. And same with Russell Brand. You know, a lot of these guys like Matthew and Russell are really good at having one-to-one conversations. They're really good at connecting with people. And that really stands out because I think even a lot of people who are academics or authors can't turn off I'm on stage lecturing at TED. They just can't do it. They can't sit there, look you in the eye and be like, you know, what's going on here with this? Da, 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 da. Are there talking points with these guys? Yes, because they're doing 100 podcasts or whatever. So that's still a thing. But it doesn't mean that they're not having a real conversation, at least in between. And if you're good at conversation, if you're a good host like you are, they're going to come out of their shell a little bit. They're going to come away from their talking points. And that's really special because a lot of times these guys are not only trained and told not to do that, but they can't do that. They just don't have a personality to fall back on a lot of the time. And that's, well, it's a shame, but it's not that unusual.
Well, let's say I go on a podcast and someone asks me, what did you learn from Jordan Harbinger?
Good luck with that.
What would you want me to say?
You know,
what lesson would you give to me?
What would I want you to say? Is that fair? Is that a fair question? What would I want you to say? Is that really? I don't know if that's a fair question.
What lesson would you want to share with me that I can reproduce in that instance?
Oh man, you know, I've got my own talking points, right? So I would say build relationships before you need them. Always show, maybe not always, most of the time, open up and show the truest version of yourself that you can muster in that moment, because that's what's really going to inspire other people to open up and talk about with you. I mean, before the show, you were like, how you doing? Most people would say, oh, good. I'm like, well, my kid is sick. He's throwing up. My wife's kind of annoyed because she's not sleeping. And then I took the kid's puke and I put it down the sink instead of in the toilet because it was closer. And now she's pissed off about that. Like, that's the beginning of a real conversation between people that actually want to connect. I could have just said, oh, I'm fine. Anyway, what does this start? 10 o'clock? Okay, let's do it. You know, and I think you should not do that, especially when other people are being put in a position to learn from you. Not that you're learning from me, but, you know, the audience is learning from me, hopefully. You should always start like that, and you should always take the opportunity to do that, because otherwise you're kind of just wasting your breath, right? Why have a conversation that doesn't mean anything?
It's a great answer. And yeah, I appreciate it now that you've shed a light on that. So thank you. Is there anything I should have asked you about today?
Jeez, probably. But whether I know what those things are is a different question entirely, and I don't. I think you did a fine job.
Thank you. I appreciate that, especially coming from you.
Yeah.
Where do people find you, Jordan?
The Jordan Harbinger Show, HARB is in boy, IN is in Nancy, GER, anywhere you find your podcasts, you know, Apple, Spotify, wherever you might find them.
Thank you for being a great guest today.
Hey, man. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.